Hello and welcome everybody to this week's edition of SBJ Live, Managing Load and Tracking Limbs, the tech innovations shaping the 2023-24 NBA season. Thanks to all of you who have registered and who have joined, whether you're doing so live or going to be watching asynchronously later on. I am thrilled to introduce our panelists, and I'll get to them in just a moment. A few little housekeeping notes if you're new to SBJ Live and this platform Livestorm. In the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a chat box. As you can see, Sports Business Journal just welcomed everybody. Please feel free to say hello, say who you're with, what you're interested in, your LinkedIn profile, any or all of the above. It's a good way to get to know others in the industry. And then there's a separate section right in the bottom right corner, just next to chat, is questions. Unlike some panels, I'm going to try to work them in throughout. So don't just wait until the very end. Feel free to ask your questions at any time. And when I see an opportune moment based on what we're discussing, I will raise it to our panelists, who I will now introduce. We have Shawn Windle, who is a longtime performance lead of the Indiana Pacers for about 18 years. Worked in college before that. He was the 2012 NBA Strength Coach of the Year and now a sports performance consultant. Thank you very much for being here, Shawn.
Thank you, Joe, for having me.
And we also have Andrew Galdi. He is the VP of Baseball and Basketball for Zeus Analytics. He's the founder of the Philadelphia Phillies R&D department. We'll get some NLCS insight here on the side, I think. But he also worked for the New York Mets and the NBA Commissioner's Office before joining Zeus. Andy, good to see you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joe. Excited to be here.
So basically just you told them to get guys who can hit a ton of home runs, and it seems to be working.
I think the key was me leaving, and they had a lot of success.
Oh, well, you're in the line of work where correlation and causation get studied. I'll let you determine which one this was. But yeah, so, to set the stage, I think two of the biggest topics that we'll cover today, the NBA, as many of you are aware, is changing its tracking system provider. It had been using exclusively Second Spectrum for years. And one of the key components of that was unlocked a huge amount of insights in how we understand the game. But the new system, Hawkeye, is now going to provide 29 points on the human body, where Second Spectrum told you where a player's center of mass is. Now, all of a sudden, you'll know where elbow joints are, wrist joints, even some fingers, and lower body as well. So there's going to be a whole new frontier of data. We'll let the experts chime in on what that could mean. Second Spectrum is still going to be involved with some of the basketball logic, and that will debut with this current season. And the second part, certainly load management, is not an unfamiliar term for anyone who's followed basketball even loosely over the past decade or so. But there are upgraded rules this year, and the player participation program. The NBA is saying that it wants to make sure all of its star players are available, particularly for nationally televised games. And there's some specific rules about how often they can sit out. But that's just going to give us an opportunity to discuss the general topic of player monitoring and how we can maximize player performance. So we're going to start this off, pretty generally. And Shawn, what are you most curious to see play out this season? What's the number one storyline that you personally are looking at?
How teams are going to manage load management, of course. I mean, that's what everybody wants to know. Because I think there are ways around it, and I think teams are going to be. I don't think you have to get awfully creative on how you're going to do that for the players that that are trying to be so-called protected. Because most guys do have something nagging from the first day of practice. So you could put somebody on an injury list with a sore ankle, sore knee, whatever it may be. And those are usually legitimate because it's just reality. So to think that everybody is out there running around at 100%, we know they're not, but I think that's how a lot of this gets circumvented. And so how does the NBA plan on so-called catching people and the punishment behind it? That's the interesting part that I'll be watching this season.
Mm-hmm. Andrew?
So my company's more focused on the data analysis side and the performance, rather than being directly with the team and managing load management. So we're actually quite excited about the new data source that you already mentioned, the Hawkeye data, and just how teams will be able to leverage this data to get a better understanding of player skills and player performance, projecting player performance kind of in the near future, and optimizing their lineups and their rosters.
Mm-hmm. You're actually this. I probably should have given a little more background. Like, give the Zeus Analytics pitch. It's sort of a very interesting model in terms of how you're structured, how you work with teams. Share with the. Hopefully everyone's read the stories I've written about you guys, but I can't promise that's actually happened. So I'll let you.
Sure. Yeah. Very quickly, Zeus is think of us as a sports consulting company where we help the analytics departments at any individual team extract more insight by building statistical models on the data that they already have. So the team shares with us, and for our NBA teams that we work with, they share with us the second spectrum data, or now will be the Hawkeye data, along with player contract data, et cetera. And we turn around statistical models that leverage that data to help give them insights as to, this player is very good at these sets of skills, and we think that they're going to age along this aging curve, and et cetera, et cetera. And we do that across many sports, all the major sports in America, plus cricket, European soccer, and some others.
Mm-hmm. And it was about 3 teams per conference in the NBA.
Yeah, so the business model is based on exclusivity. So we only partner with a maximum of 3 teams per conference in the NBA to hopefully give our partners some competitive advantage, whether they have these models and other teams don't, essentially.
Sure. And actually, and Shawn, I'm sure a number of our audience members know exactly what a performance head does, but that term can be applied a little bit differently. What was under your purview with the Pacers? Who reported to you? What did you oversee?
Yeah, I mean, way back when I was just a strength coach wearing a lot of different hats, and this was in 2005, before sports science was a term in the NBA. And then as it started to enter the NBA and people talking about load management and wearables were starting to be produced, and it was now a new concept, and all the teams were trying to jump into this so-called rat race of building a sports science department. So that then led to me handling the sports science piece of it, because we felt culture was important, knowing what you could ask of guys to do, because, if it were European soccer, guys are used to wearing a wearable. They were used to going through some of the evaluations that we were now trying to have players do. So long story short, as that position evolved, I managed the strength coaches. That included our G League strength coach, chef, nutritionist, and worked closely with our analytics group. So it was kind of all encompassing of everything that could touch a player in a single day, and trying to make sense of the data and create a daily plan or a long-term plan for the team and individuals. And when you're playing like every 1.7 days, it's tough to turn things around quickly.
Yeah, no pressure. And late night travel and all the other fun things that go with it. Here, actually, we have a question from the audience already. Let's jump right into it. Noah asks, what do you make of the NBA's recent press release stating that load management is, quote, no longer supported by science? We're jumping in hard here. Shawn, this seems to be for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a really hard time with looking at a data point, and it's not just one data point, but we're talking about one player and data from a game, or some of the things that were leading up to making a decision on when a player is going to need rest. I had a really hard time with trying to find stuff in the data to suggest that. Now, if you want to say that if we rest a player and that's our version of load management, well, of course, he has no exposure. And a player that plays 36 minutes a night has more exposure than somebody who plays 18 minutes a night. So their likelihood is going to increase. The thing for us was always looking at trends and what their trend lines were, and some of the metrics that we were obviously tracking, and then trying to decide, is this just not an anomaly, but sometimes it's matchup related. It could be scheme related. There are scheduling factors that sometimes you'll see a performance drop off when it comes to speeds and distances and intensity levels. But that doesn't mean that that's necessarily a red flag. You have your other data sources. But again, I think it's a very muddy science to answer the question. When I hear people say that they have a definitive date of when somebody needs to rest, I'm a little leery of that. To me, load management was always something that we did on days off. Load management was don't practice today, or an extra recovery piece, or change some nutrition. Like, there are a lot of other ways. When if you're a top team and you think you're playing for June, you can gamble and have some of your stars rest because you're playing for a deep playoff run. If you're in the middle of the pack, every game is important. So generally you need all your guys available. And sometimes life is just a natural load management. A guy rolls his ankle and, the arguments can go on about, well, could you have prevented the rolled ankle if he were fresh? And I've seen those arguments, and, sometimes these things just happen. Now they're out for 7 days, 10 days, and there's natural load management right there.
Yeah. I had a chance to speak with Joe Rogowski, who led performance for a couple NBA teams, and then he was the chief medical officer of the NBPA. He was on the podcast that SBJ Tech hosts with the Leaders Performance Institute, and he had a very similar sentiment that he shared, and I think he even more explicitly said that overtraining wasn't really the problem. It was making sure that guys were ready to go. We'll come back. We'll put a pin in load management for a moment. I want to go to Andy for a moment. When you talk about being excited about this new data source, what are some of the first, what's the low-hanging fruit that this is going to be able to unlock for you?
Yeah, you kind of alluded to it in the beginning when you introduced the topic, just saying that the difference between the tracking data that was available before, provided by Second Spectrum, and this tracking data that will be available starting this season, provided by Hawkeye, is just the joint tracking that we'll be getting in addition to center of mass. So for people who don't know, in previous years, we were able to know where players were on the court at a resolution of 25 frames per second, and where the ball was. But the player tracking was only telling you where the player was on the court, but not details like where their limbs were, or whether they were jumping in the air or not, or whether they were facing in one direction or the other direction. Those are the types of things that the limb tracking is going to really unveil, and that helps a ton when we're trying to model NBA player performance, because a lot of the models try to predict, at least ones that we're working on and the teams are working on, is saying how effective is this player at these particular skills? Let's take passing, for instance. How effective is this player at making passes? How much do this player's passes improve the state of the possession, improve the probability of scoring points? Knowing where players are looking, where defenders are looking or not looking, can be really influential in order to try to model, hey, this pass is effective or not, or this player could gain a lot of value if they make this pass or not. So this is just a whole other dimension of data that we did not have before, that we can really get a more, models are just, representations of reality, but as we have more and more data, that representation gets more and more accurate. And this limb data is going to help us get a lot more closer to a truth of how good players are at these different skills.
Yeah, and adding limb tracking is helpful when an NBA player's limb is much larger than yours or mine, and it's a key component. And I know, and sort of to that point, I know when you and I spoke yesterday, you talked about defensive shot contesting. I'd love to hear what your thoughts here and share them with everyone here.
Yeah, for sure. So, from some experience from baseball. So baseball did a similar kind of technology shift a couple of years ago, where they introduced actually Hawkeye and Hawkeye limb tracking to Major League Baseball. I was working at the Phillies at the time. And so there was all sorts of excitement about the things that we could potentially do with this data And a lot of it was around pitching and batting mechanics. And what we found was that we definitely could do that. That data was capable of making those kinds of changes, but there was little things and little gotchas kind of that came along the way that we learned a lot about and kind of anticipate maybe in basketball similar-ish things might happen. And for example, it's difficult to track small body parts that move very, very quickly through the optical cameras, and which doesn't, it's just sort of might seem obvious or whatever, but like a pitcher's hand when they're moving, tracking their pinky joint or their thumb joint is very, very difficult because it's just moving so fast when they're throwing. And in similar for basketball, it might be the case, we haven't seen the data yet, that in a shot, when like wrist flexion on the shot might be moving really, really quickly through space, and these cameras might struggle maybe at the beginning, or the software behind the cameras at tracking that extremely accurately. It may catch it accurately, but the experience in baseball is like it took some time for those models to sort of catch up. So there might be some areas that this joint tracking data might be able to benefit teams that in the shorter term, that might be different from what they anticipated. So maybe instead of like shot mechanics, teams maybe, or things like that, where you're looking at small joints moving quickly and trying to assess how players are moving. Things like more obvious, still kind of things like, is a defender's hand in front of an offensive player's face or the ball while they're shooting, is something that's more easily tracked through the cameras and more difficult to miss, right? Because there's many frames where the hand is in that position, and we might be able to categorize contests in a more accurate manner than we were with the second spectrum data, where we just knew, hey, this player was close to this other player, so we're counting it as a contest, but we didn't actually know if the defender's hands were up or down, or if the defender was facing the wrong way, and all those things that kind of I mentioned before. So that will help in all manners of like understanding like players shooting under pressure, or what kind of pressure is most effective to alter a shot or make that shot less effective.
Yeah, that's great. And Shawn, from your performance perspective, when you have new limb tracking data, all this extra rich granular movement and joints, what would you hope to gain from it?
I mean, I know what Andy's saying, like it's going to be really hard to capture, at least in this early phase, of fingers and wrists and that sort of thing. But to me, like from a whole performance perspective, if you're not, I know people associate me with my experience in strength and conditioning. It's that I'm looking at things in the weight room or conditioning aspects and stuff. But the whole performance paradigm is, we're trying to get them just to be better athletes. Some people don't need more time in the weight room. They might need more time developing their jump shot. And so to get that sort of specific feedback, where if you shoot 300 shots after practice and from 5 different spots, and there's no speed to it, there's no fear of missing, no consequence or anything like that. And then you have a guy who enters the game and he's playing 12 minutes a night and he gets 4 shots, like that's really important feedback. So that's where I would really love to see, once that becomes a trusted data source of where are they bringing the ball from? Do they get it to their hip? Is it in line? How do you coach those things in game so you can replicate that through their training process? And I think like looking at joint angles during a game, and I'm viewing this slightly different than Andy. I hear what he's saying about contests, and most coaches are watching those contests after a game, and they know, and they're sitting down with a guy, and so they'll and some coaches have a little bit different rule about the distance of the contest. They'll say, well, within 3 feet. Some say no, it has to be within 1.5 feet. And so I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where everybody is agreeing on what an appropriate level of contest is, but I understand what he's saying. But I know other people are talking about, like, can you spot fatigue? Is there a joint angle on a change of direction late in the game where you say, all right, he's starting to slow down and maybe more susceptible for injury? But I think, again, those things, like right now with the how new this is, there's just so many questions that we really have no idea. I'd hate to be going through this right now because you don't really know what you're looking for. And I think quickly you'll figure out, I hate to be an early adopter because we probably really won't know have any great insights for at least 2 or 3 years, possibly, hopefully sooner. But I think it'd be really tough to look at things like fatigue, because there's very little times that a change of direction is the exact same in a first quarter versus a fourth quarter. What's the time of the game, the score of the game? There are just so many factors in it. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Actually, I was curious, Shawn, what your thoughts were on. So if the Hawkeye data might, one application of Hawkeye data I was thinking about might be its ability to count things that may have been tedious or more difficult to count from a load management standpoint. Like how many times when a player leapt, they leapt off their right foot or off their left foot, or when they landed on their right foot or on their left foot. Are those, for assessing strength and balances or things of that nature? Do you think that type of data, even just counting those types of things, would be helpful from a strength and conditioning standpoint for teams?
It certainly can be, and you're going to have some biases also of like some wings on certain teams, certain systems, like they're only going to run down the right side of the floor, if it's coming into a half court set type of thing, or so you'll see a lot of biases where this is their play style, or they like to get to their spots and they cross them over from right to left or whatever it is. I think there will be some value in some of that, but I also don't know yet if that can fully be trusted. But I think that the load management part of it will be really interesting, because I think it's good where it's at, but we all know that it's not perfect. And I think you have to factor in how many times the player is getting hit by a screen, whether they're setting it or they're the one on the receiving end of it. Like you said, which foot they're jumping off or landing. I think we can get a lot better with the load management aspect, and this potentially can help that.
Mm-hmm. Seems we lost Andy for a sec, but while he comes back, another question for you, Shawn, and this is something that you've told me in a prior conversation, is that the other factor seems to be that there aren't a lot of 100% intensity moments on the court, right? So if you're like looking at joint angles and some of these changes of direction, a lot of it's not done at full speed, right?
Right. Yeah. We look at, high speed accelerations, high speed decelerations, sprints and max speeds. And so how do you classify what a max speed is? Is it their max speed like in a gym with a stopwatch, or is it their max speed on a basketball court in the context of a game or a conditioning drill? And so, what I like to use is max speed that we see in a game, even if it's a scrimmage or something from practice, but what they can do while live play is going on. And when you look at how many events how many high sprints they have over like 90%, it can be 1 or 2 a game. It might not happen for another week. These are transition opportunities where a guy is out either chasing down for a block or he's running down for a breakaway dunk, and it just doesn't happen a lot. So then you're starting to compare things that in middle ground, and middle ground, there can be a lot of movement variation, and using some IMUs on shoes and looking at left-right difference with people that we know have had left-right differences at those slower speeds. You don't capture that asymmetry. You really only capture it when they're up at close to maximal effort. Yeah.
And well, I will say that I joined an adult hoops league. That's a 40 up adult hoops league. And there's 0 plays the entire season at 100% effort. We're all right. But I don't think there were that many injuries. It's probably a direct correlation of the two. So you mentioned the IMUs, which I'm sure most of the audience knows, but the inertial measurement units, like accelerometers and so forth. Shoes are probably not as commonplace, although I'm sure there's a rich data set, at least a potential of it. But what are some of the other important tools that you used to track players?
I mean, I think that force plates, the dual force plates, gave us a lot of information. They can be tricky to interpret the information. You have your baseline stuff when players come back, what they look like. You sometimes see a degradation in certain qualities over the course of the season. You're looking at left versus right. You're trying to figure out what's acceptable for an asymmetry. How How do you want to manage that? Is there a reason behind the asymmetry? You also have to add in so many other variables behind that. How motivated were they to jump? If we played in a game that ended at 9:30 the night before and they come in the weight room at 10 a.m. the next day, they're really not, some guys really aren't that excited about giving you a max effort jump. So is it really reliable? What am I doing with this data? I think any sort of like musculoskeletal screening, like just looking at, we used, in years past, we'd use Physimax, we use Fusionetics recently. We've done some like less testing, some different jump testing, landing testing, and just trying to track those asymmetries. And again, I think that's where, going back to the pose data, maybe we can tease out and get a better idea of what's actually happening on the court in terms of these asymmetries. However, like I said, if they're not max efforts, I don't know if you're going to see a lot, but again, as it plays out, we might be able to find some of these things. And because when we're testing in a controlled environment like the weight room, it's a lab type setting, some guys either rise to the occasion or some guys don't want to be bothered with it. And it's very sterile and not movement like. If I watch a counter movement jump in the weight room on a force plate, it looks entirely different than how they jump for a rebound in a game.
Right. Yeah, no, it's tough that transfer of skill or the transfer of interpretation is certainly a challenge. And then I assume there are also some very valuable non-technological understand, like, the trained eye asking questions. I mean, how much do those get played into the equation as well?
I mean, I think that's the trained eye is huge. I think being able to watch your athletes move on a daily basis, being present at practice, watching guys, whether something came up weird in their numbers and you haven't really adjusted anything yet, but you want to see how they're moving, return to play, banging their knee off the court last night, and just knowing how an athlete normally moves on the court. Because again, it's in the weight room or a testing type of environment, it can look totally different. I've seen players that don't look like athletes at all in the weight room, and then they get out on the floor and blow you away. And you thought, like in the draft process, you'd see that frequently, a guy that you thought wasn't very athletic, and then all of a sudden they step out on the floor and they blow you away with what they can do. And so again, you're like, well, have you never done the test? Are you disinterested? Are you just a bad test taker? You didn't study, on and on and on. But so I think being able to have that eye of knowing how your athletes move is extremely important, and being able to pick up on that. And I think that what happens with at least younger strength coaches and younger practitioners is they rely so much on data that they don't really have that eye. They're just looking at the numbers and trying to tell a story. And just because I'm old and have gray hair, I kind of go from the other side. I look at the movement, I talk to the athlete, and then I want the data to either confirm or refute what I'm thinking. And then we make decisions based off from all of that combined.
Yeah. Well, we had a sneak preview there, but we're about to have an additional guest join us. Practice must have ended in time for him to do so. But Jesse Mermis, an Orlando Magic assistant coach, will be joining to share some of his insights here in a moment. And hopefully Andy will rejoin as well. And here he is. The nameplate there on the corner is wrong. But Jesse, great to have you. Thank you so much for.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I just gave a quick intro since you did pop on quickly. So the spoiler alert, Jesse Mermis is here. And then, we've got Shawn Windle, longtime Pacers performance coach.
Hey, Shawn.
And so we're talking about the tech innovations shaping the NBA season. And sort of the main one that we started spending some time with is, well, the two main ones are load management, of course, is certainly becoming a increasingly hot button issue in the NBA with some new rules governing it. But also maybe I'll ask you this one first is, with the new player tracking system and Hawkeye coming in and all the limb tracking, as a coaching staff, how much of that data do you expect to, what from that data do you think will help you do your job better? And, are there certain areas that you're going to prioritize first to learn from?
Yeah, no, I'm super excited to, get that data in this season, because so much of the NBA has become size and length dominant, and trying to create an advantage both offensively and defensively is becoming more difficult. And so, you know, some of the things in the past that we do generically, we're trying to apply to someone the size of Cole Anthony and apply it to the same way that we are to Paulo Banchero. And obviously, like, the more information that we can gather, process, the more intricate some of the schemes and the technical things that we're doing from a coaching standpoint that we can, you know, figure out and tweak. And so I think, you know, knowing like the contest of a shot, you know, who's contesting it, how long are their arms, what's the distance between the release of the shot and that person's hand and fingertips. And so all those things play a part. You know, we tell the players all the time, like, when we're talking spacing out there, like, every inch on an NBA floor matters. And the reason why it matters is because the talent level of these guys is so incredible that it's just very difficult to create advantages. And so if you're 1 inch over from the spot you're supposed to be in, your shot becomes a little bit more difficult. And so the more data that we have to be able to provide that information, I think will, you know, trickle its way into the game and improve the game.
Yeah. And then have you started seeing any of it from the preseason yet, or is it going to be more regular season?
Yeah, more regular season. Yeah.
And actually, you mentioned the shot contesting. We Shawn made the good point earlier that basically no group of people in basketball will ever agree on like what a contested shot is. What's your definition?
Yeah, I totally agree with him, but maybe from a different standpoint. He's probably talking maybe body mechanics and how someone views things, but I'm talking about it from a mental standpoint, because a lot of times when, you know, the casual fan is just watching, they're not understanding the chess dynamics that are going on out there on the floor between player to player. Who's contesting my shot? What's their stature in the league? What's their contract size? How long have they played? How big are they? Like, everything is playing into their mind in a split second. And so,
is there trash talk going on at the same time?
Right. Are the coaches yelling from the sideline? How are they being guarded? What is the scheme that the team is using against them? Are they being disrespected and just left out there wide open? So there's a lot going on within that game that the players are having to process.
Yeah, no, all well put. And actually, you mentioned that word spacing, and I'm going to go to Andy, who has rejoined us on the phone. I know yesterday, while we were talking about this, I know one of the things you've been thinking about is how the expected value, you know, players, but also how with some of this new data, we might be able to drive it down a little bit more per possession. Can you elaborate and share what you're thinking about?
Yeah, and apologies for the technical issues here, but the idea is basically that, you know, this data, you know, even the second spectrum data, even before the Hawkeye data, where we're just getting center of mass of the players and the ball, really opens up a whole new way of analyzing player performance by looking at some of the things just previously mentioned about like how open players are, and some information on like defensive schemes and where all their offensive teammates are located. And we can model basically the expected points scored that a possession will yield, like how many points the offense will score eventually at the end of the possession, given where all the players are on the court at any moment in time or any frame, and how, you know, contextual factors like how much time is left on the shot clock and you know, what the game score, et cetera, is. And why that's so powerful is that you know, a lot of understanding of like player performance and player skill has traditionally been built off of adjusted plus minus models, which are great and are very, very impactful. But one of the downsides of those models is that you have to wait sort of until the end of the possession to get an outcome, whether points are scored or points are not scored. By being able to model the expected amount of points that are going to be scored at any camera frame, you essentially get 25 times a second a value of how of the likelihood of scoring or how many points will be scored at any point in time. So you can segment the play out and say, hey, here was this pick and roll, or here was a screen, and the beginning of the screen there was an expectation that 1 point would be scored in this possession, but at the end of the screen, because of the new configuration of players on the court and how much time is left on the shot clock and how wide open somebody is now because of the screen, the expectation is that there'll be 2 points scored on this possession. So that increase in 1 point, you could run basically a similar adjusted plus minus model in that sub-segment of a play and get some really valuable insight as to who is providing value on screens and things like that, and really understand player skill on a whole other dimension rather than just like who is generally providing help in order to increase or decrease, if you're looking at it from the defensive side, points per possession.
Yeah, hearing that makes me think that the way that in baseball RBIs have been devalued because you realize there's so much context of how your teammates' contribution assists are almost sort of like the basketball equivalent. Like you can make a hit a double, but if no one's on base, you get no RBIs. But if you're like make a great pass and your teammate wasn't looking for it, you don't get that assist. So there's a little bit of an analogy there, but oversimplification, and fascinating to see that expected value sort of those models evolve. And Shawn, we did have one other audience question here. I think this is probably better suited for you. Do you believe there's enough research backing up what data from Hawkeye you will use, or I realize you haven't actually had a chance to use it yet, but consider injury risk factors or performance factors? I mean, do you think that data, how much will that data be applicable?
Yeah, right now, again, like not having actually seen the data, and I think it's going to grow, over the next 2 or 3 years of what we're going to learn from it. But right now, immediately, I don't see a huge benefit, at least in terms of injury prevention training, injury prediction, which, doesn't exist. But I don't see it being, at least initially, extremely useful, again, because of if we're looking at a lot of events that are happening in kind of that middle range of a jog, trot, it's not full speed. It's really hard to compare or to tease out an asymmetry, a movement impairment, something to that effect. I don't know how much it's going to change immediately what teams are doing in the weight room. But like I said, I think in 2 or 3 years, we might be having a totally different conversation, and it's become a lot more granular and teams know what to do with it. But yeah, it's going to be a while before that happens.
Sure. Then you see change of technology. It takes a little while to, get.
Yeah, and I think Hawkeye will evolve after a year, 2 years, and just as they go through their growing pains and learn more about it, and guys like Andy out there giving feedback, and I think it's just going to become a better model. And then the closer we move to maybe it is a in-game constant ongoing biomechanical assessment,
which could be amazing.
Yeah.
And Jesse, with there is the new player participation rules this year, and I know load management ends up being a very collaborative process between performance teams and coaching staffs. What is it? How are you looking at this year's plan? Like, is it much different than years past? I mean, does this reflect a sea change in how much how everything's being viewed, or is it maybe slight modifications along the way?
Yeah, I'll be interested to see. I mean, I'm super that's above my pay grade on those decisions. But what I do know that I can always vouch for is that the players want to play, and I know they've come out and said that, and there's truth to that. I can back that up. Typically, they want to play and they want to hoop, and but obviously it's not that simple, and some of those decisions have to be made for them because I did work for Kevin McHale in Houston, and he was a wonderful man, but he could barely walk around, and he was in constant pain because he probably played so many times where he shouldn't have played, and there should have been someone kind of looking out for his best interests. So it'll be interesting to see. I think obviously as the game progresses and we get more information and like what Shawn said, as maybe some of this data is processed, some of those decisions become more, accurate. But I do know I respect the players. They want to play as much as they can.
Sure. And actually, I'm also curious. You had a chance a moment ago to hear what Andy said about some of the expected value and possessions. Is that something like what are your thoughts on that insight and compare and like how much do you look at those kinds of plus minus models from your seat on the bench?
Yeah, it's so interesting because like NBA coaching, it's such a nuanced thing, and so a lot of those times, like when you're coaching, you're seeing some of that, and you're trying to coach and explain that to the players and try to define it. But now having some information and facts to back up your opinions and some of your instinctual knowledge just over the years is going to be so valuable, because it's just everything that you think or you see or based on history in games, like what happened in a game, who's confident, who's not, like expected. There's so much feel to that. But if we can have data to back up what the coach is seeing and thinking on a nightly basis from within inside the NBA, I think it helps the game grow, and it helps us explain it to the players. It helps us, back it up to explain to the media, to the front offices. Like it just gets everybody kind of on the same page.
Mm-hmm. And actually, one more sort of along those same lines, like how much, if ever, do these kinds of like tracking data, I mean, do you ever get access during the game? Like, is there anything that helps in game, or is this largely just, reviewing afterwards and preparing for the next opponent?
It's a great question that there's no way I would answer that, because I'm sure like I would get in trouble on that. But I do know that whatever is available, every NBA team is trying to get a competitive advantage.
Sure.
And so if you can find one and Hawkeye data is providing you a competitive advantage, someone will be using it.
Yeah. No, well said. And I mean, all right. We are getting near the end of the panel, so if those of you who are holding on to questions, please do feel free to make sure you keep asking them. And the other part of the Hawkeye data that, or the use of the Hawkeye cameras, is that for the first time we're going to have a small degree of automated officiating. I mean, the hope is that goaltending will be an automated call. There's promise of maybe increasing some of the instant replay reviews or making some of them a little bit more, yes, no, quick decisions. Most of this is just being tested, I should be clear, but it is definitely being considered in the future. How did, maybe this is more of a Jesse question again, but like, do you think any thoughts as to how much automation can help officiating? Is that something that is worth exploring?
Yes, I'm super excited about that because I think it's very difficult in NBA games, especially with three of them and their different vantage points and what they're supposed to be looking at when they're in the trail as opposed to the baseline. Like, it's a difficult job. And so if that job can be made easier with Hawkeye cameras to decide if that ball hit the board before the player got to it, the peak of the height of the ball, like, is it on its way down? Is it at the top? Like, if that kind of judgment can be taken away from them, I think that would really help out the officials. And I think that would help the game.
Mm-hmm. Shawn or Andy, no pressure, but either of you have any thoughts, data on automated officiating?
I mean, I think it's great the more they can add that in. I know that officials are getting nervous because of how scrutinized they are from, the league office, and obviously from fans. They've always been scrutinized from fans and coaches in the heat of the moment. But even the league office, the way they grade them, and it's nerve-wracking to those guys for sure. And it's hard to tell, like, how many times you're looking at a computer screen, whether you're going to challenge a call, and a group of coaches can't figure out whether or not they should challenge it. It's that hard. And they're making like quick decisions on the fly, and a team of coaches is staring at a computer screen saying, well, I mean, technically his hand touched him on the way up on his left hip, and they're not going to overturn that.
Right.
But did it impact the shot? No. But the hand was there, so the call is justified. So I think the more elements you can add in from Hawkeye to help the officials, I think it's great. I hope they would feel like it's great, but some of those guys, like I said, it's nerve-wracking the way that their performance is graded, and yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I know it's a much harder job than I would want to take on. I can say that safely. And actually, we have another question from Demetrius. What is maybe a hypothesis that you expect Hawkeye to validate? What's something that you've long suspected is true about basketball that maybe now we'll have the data set to confirm or disprove? Any one of you three can jump in whenever you have something in mind. Yeah, it's a tough one without any advance warning.
I don't have anything on that. I'm kind of wait and see. I can't wait. I'm just excited to see what's going to come up.
Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things that come to mind are just the value of, limb and like leg positioning and like taking up space in whether it's for shot contest or for ball screens or for boxing out. And that kind of realm, we might be able to get some good information as to say, hey, and this is where the Hawkeye data could really help maybe in a player development context of understanding, hey, doing this thing in this manner, whether it's contesting a shot by putting your hand in in the player's face or closer to the ball, or whether it's like boxing out by doing this or doing that, or those types of things, or how to defend passing lanes in a way, could really reveal slightly better ways to defend offensive players. And this is just from the defensive point of view. But so it's not really like a hypothesis that I think, hey, I think basketball works like this, and I'm interested in seeing it get validated. But I'm just interested in what that we can look at these things that we haven't really been able to look at from a data-driven standpoint, and just see like what actually is the best way to defend a passing lane, or to set a screen, or to do all these other things with your body and limbs.
Yeah, no, great point. And I wonder if maybe a baby hook where your body's kind of shielding your shot a little bit, maybe we'll find out that's the best way to take a close-up shot. Or I don't know, I'm just spitballing off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are a lot of.
Yeah, and actually that's a great point. That's like an addition that this data is going to provide, is like we don't have much data or an ability to identify shots that are taken off balance. And with the limb tracking, we should be able to get a better idea of saying, well, this person's center of gravity is here, but the ball was here when it left this player's hand, and that might be offset to the right or offset to the left or forward or backwards. And we could get a certain value associated in terms of the decrease in field goal percentage by forcing someone to be off balance on their shot. No doubt that lowers the probability of that shot going in, but how much does it lower? And should defenses be trying to, harder to optimize that, or should schemes be developed to try to optimize that in a more consistently?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just definitely see the value in player development. I think, we were talking earlier about spacing, and it's amazing how much 6 inches or a foot can difference between a good shot and a bad shot, or a few degrees of rotation, like where exactly the screen is set and getting somebody open or playing the pick and roll. Like every inch of that court is so valuable. And I think that looking at different lineups and combination and that length and how much, talking defensively, are they covering enough ground? Are they in their gaps? Like adding that extra piece, coaches show film and can use that obviously as a visual medium to the player, but sometimes having that extra little piece of data behind it and say, all right, now we have enough data to say, you might only, we know guys when they go into film session, they're generally only watching themselves and they're not paying attention, or even when they're standing on the baseline in practice waiting to go in, they don't even know the play when they're coming in because they're only worried about themselves. But if you end up with enough data to support, here is why this is really important, that you have to be on the nail in these scenarios, that you're now going to create more buy-in and say, hey, look, I can't play you with this group because we don't have enough length. You're our guy with length and you're not in the right spot, or whatever scenario there is. But I think you can really do a pretty good job of putting a value, a dollar amount almost, on every inch of that floor.
Okay. Anything to add, Jesse?
Yeah, no, I agree with Shawn. It's just like driving some of those points home with facts. Again, it's just like, it's not the coach telling you. This is, I'm telling you, and the cameras and the stats, the data, everyone is saying this is a fact. This is not my opinion. This is a fact. And so you need to get there. And if you're not in the right spot, then we got to find someone that will get to that spot.
Mm-hmm. This is great. So we're going to wind down now. Final question. And again, probably should have given a little advance warning on this one. So the last time that we had like a major revolution in data, it was sort of well documented that like a player like Shane Battier became kind of the poster child because we suddenly realized he had a lot more value for some of the things that he was doing. Who is a player, or if you don't want to name a specific guy, what is like the type of player that you think might benefit the most from this sort of new data age?
Yeah, I think, the role players in the NBA are kind of the unsung heroes, and they kind of always have been. And the stars get the majority of the credit, and it's due because you can't do it without them. We've seen that. Like, you have to have, in this day and age, now it's up to 3. It used to be only 2, but it's like you got to have those guys to win, and everyone knows that. But those guys can't win without the role guys doing all the stuff that no one else is willing to do. And I think, being able to quantify, what is a high-level role player with facts, like when this guy goes to challenge a shot, doesn't matter how good the shooter is, he makes people miss. He might not be the longest, he might not be the most explosive, he might not be the most athletic, but there's something that he's doing that is making guys miss at a higher percentage than everybody else. And if we can quantify that, I think it builds the value of these role guys up, and some of their contracts, hopefully will, reflect that based on factual data, that how they're impacting games and impacting winning.
Yeah, with all the natural language processing, we need some microphones so we can also quantify trash talking to go with it as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I totally agree. It's that role player. It's that, you have to have those guys perform to win games. Like, the stars do win the game. You're not going to do it without them. But, there's so much switching now. Like some of the defensive schemes, offensives have become so good. The skill level is so high with most NBA players offensively that you don't really have to value a great on-ball defender because of so many of the schemes now, but you need the role player who's in his gap. He's in the right place. He's preventing a drive. He's preventing that player that's driving to get to the rim. He has to pull up for a contested shot or whatever it may be. And I think being able to quantify it that way with some of this could really be valuable to those guys in that mid-level or even lower level of salary.
Mm-hmm. All right, Andy, over to you for the finale.
Yeah, I'm just sort of wanted to, I think it's definitely going to be role players. And I think it's definitely going to be something to do with what was just talked about, like the spacing and where players are located, they're creating value by being located in the right spots, and we're able to actually quantify that now and identify that, which will by examining like how they affect the expected points of that possession in a positive or negative manner, and then teams can target those role players and or defensive schemes in particular to try to get more value out of their current roster, or acquire players to help improve their roster. So it's definitely going to be something in that capacity, because the spatial data this data of like where players are located and where their limbs are is just so rich with this information that, whereas in the Shane Battier context, it was like we know when he's on the court, good things happen, but we don't actually know why. Whereas now, with the same data, if he was still playing and we could examine it, we would say, oh, this is why. He's located in this spot, and it's very advantageous for a defender to be located in this spot or a rebounder to be located in this spot, and he's always in the optimal spot. There's something about him and his basketball instincts that make that valuable. We need to acquire this player.
Yeah, it was a trick question. The answer was Shane Battier again. That's who's probably going to be even more valued. This has been a great conversation. Thank you all to everyone in the audience, but most especially to our panelists, Shawn, Jesse, Andrew. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Come back next week, SBJ Live. The topic next Wednesday, October 25th, is enhancing the college game day experience through targeted tech investments, and it's presented by Evolve. You've been great. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the NBA season. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.